let's talk about how this might matter for training. Okay, so I mentioned that there's a paper and a medical paper that looked at like the aspects of your nervous system that feed into your heart. There is a paper that took a look into how to use a Polartec. So this is a key item, right? They used this, the input ECG, to inform training. It's a pretty good paper. It actually shows individual results, and that is a highly important piece of information because of what I just said right here. If you have different people with different resting heart rates and you don't control for that, you just give me an average number, I don't know what to do with that information. But if you take each person and say, at least I'm just going to show you each person over time, I can say, okay, I can at least watch that person and not just see everything kind of get smoothed out into an average. And what they found is there was a way, I'm not going to get into the paper too much on this pod, maybe another one. They found there was a way where you could basically check your heart rate variability with the earlier version of a Polartec, and it would inform you of what style of training you should do that day. There's basically three options. There's a high intensity, a light intensity, and rest. And after a pretty short period of time, which is always the bummer with these types of tests, because you don't know how long it can keep going for if you want to train for more than 1 month of your life, they found out that the people that followed that program actually had a little bit higher ability of, they called it load, which was like a combination of how fast could you run in time. And they found that they had a little bit higher VO2 max, or about the same VO2 max actually, as a group that just did a standard protocol where it's like, here's your program, like the one I got in college. Boom, this is it. I don't care, just do it. The control group, another good part of the study, didn't have much change. The other thing that's subtle in their picture, which again we'll get into at another point in time, was that the grouping, so if you look at it like a team, the grouping of the two teams was different. The team that had everybody follow the same program had a few people actually end up worse after a month. They had some measurements that were worse, which in my world is what's called overtraining. Okay? The other group had no one end up worse, and it was a little bit tighter grouping of how much improvement they had. So that's pretty exciting. You can make it personalized on the front end, and you get a much better grouping. Everybody succeeds on the back end. So that's a pretty cool part about that paper. The negative is that there aren't many other papers that have used anything, whether it's the ECG version or this sort of like PPG little LED-based version like your iWatch and Scotias and Oura Rings. Almost nothing has been published in the literature about how to use them and if using them had any benefit. I will caveat that to say that at this moment in time, I don't have one of those infinite licenses where I can read every single paper that comes out in any journal. So there could be a couple out there which have something to do with using the PPG-based device. I just can't access them. But I can tell you there's certainly not a lot of literature. There's only a few papers that use a Polartec style device, and even then it's not necessarily a real world. Sometimes it's in like a lab or controlled environment, and there's hardly any with the PPG-based device, whereas of course there's thousands of paper using devices for other things in the medical world. So that it's very small transmission of information for us to know what to do out here in the real world, which again is what I try and work on. So that's one of the negatives. But there, and I will say off too, in case someone has researched it, I am actively ignoring a PLOS paper by a Chinese group. And the reason I'm ignoring it is because they trained the different groups of people. It was cool design of what they were trying to do, but they trained them in a very controlled environment, temperature, lighting, time of day, all that kind of stuff. So not always applicable to real people. And then the second problem is they didn't report any kind of individualized statistics, nor did they provide any baseline statistics. So I have a real problem with papers that come out and don't show you a baseline and the change. They just kind of give you an average change at the end. I don't find that to be, it's not detailed enough for me to use because that you don't know what the baseline was. One group could have been different off the get-go, and then their change, even though it looks bigger, maybe they just caught up with everybody else. So that's a problem right there in the analysis. If they change analysis, I would definitely go back and read it. Okay, we talked about time constants. We're good with that. One other paper I want to talk about is a great paper. I will put a link to it in the show notes. It is a paper that showed a negative, negative result meaning that there wasn't a result. There wasn't a big change using heart rate variability, or in essence, observing heart rate variability. So I appreciate papers that have the guts to say, we thought this would work and show something, and it didn't. So it was 2 elite rowers, like in the World Championship. One of them, they both had their own particular training programs. That's not mentioned. They followed them, and in the ramp up to the competition, one person started to look like this top graph, where instead of this being heart rates, now let's call it heart rate variability. So it was increasing, which again, a lot of these devices and a lot of the things I've read want to convince you that that is a good sign. I'm not sure that that really is. Here's why. Another reason why, besides the addiction literature I talked about. The other person who was competing in a rowing event had a constantly kind of decreasing heart rate variability. And here's the fun part. When the competition came, what do you think happened? 3, 2, 1. I gave you 5 seconds. They both won. So it's unclear if heart rate variability, again, was able to capture something that mattered for their success to win a world championship. Now again, I don't know if that's because possibly their average heart rates were changing. That wasn't reported. So I can't discount that there actually was a similarity between the two because I can't tell. All I know is that one of them, by the hypothesis, should have been ramping up just great and looking forward to hopefully a win. And the other one was looking like, oh man, the wheels are coming off, you're overdoing it. And that person also won. So it's unclear here what heart rate variability in the time domain really means in terms of training.